The crowd erupted as Ronda Rousey stepped into the octagon, her eyes locked on Holm across the cage. What nobody knew was that this fight would change everything they thought they knew about both fighters. The tension was suffocating as 30,000 fans held their breath, sensing something extraordinary was about to unfold. Rousey had dominated every opponent before this moment, her armbar submission finishing fights in seconds. But Holm stood different, calm, calculating. The former boxing champion had been studying Ronda's every move for months, waiting for this exact opportunity. The bell rang, and immediately Ronda charged forward with her signature aggression. She threw wild punches, trying to close the distance and get the fight to the ground where she was unstoppable. But Holly moved like water, slipping every attack with surgical precision. Her footwork was poetry in motion, circling away from danger while landing sharp jabs that snapped Ronda's head back. "Come on, Ronda!" screamed her coach from the corner, but something was wrong. The champion, who had never looked vulnerable, was being picked apart by someone who understood her weaknesses better than she understood them herself. Holly's left hand found its mark again and again. Each punch was calculated, measured, designed to break down the most feared woman in mixed martial arts. Ronda's face began to swell, her confidence cracking with every clean shot that landed. The crowd sensed the shift in momentum, their cheers becoming nervous murmurs. By the end of the first round, blood trickled from Ronda's nose. She sat on her stool, breathing heavily, while her corner worked frantically to stop the bleeding. Across the octagon, Holly looked fresh, untouched, like she had just finished a light sparring session. The second round began with Ronda desperately trying to change the course of the fight. She shot for takedowns, threw wild haymakers, did everything she could to turn the tide. But Holly had prepared for this moment her entire life. Every movement was deliberate, every counterattack perfectly timed. Then it happened. As Ronda rushed forward with reckless abandon, Holly stepped to the side and threw a left high kick that connected flush with Ronda's neck. The sound echoed through the arena like a gunshot. Ronda's body went limp instantly, crashing to the canvas in a heap that sent shockwaves through the crowd. The referee immediately stepped in, waving his arms frantically as Holly raised her hands in victory. Medical staff rushed into the octagon while Ronda lay motionless on the canvas. The woman who had seemed invincible just minutes before was now unconscious, her reign of terror ended by a single, perfectly placed kick. If you're enjoying this incredible story of one of the biggest upsets in UFC history, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss these amazing fight breakdowns. Drop a comment below and tell us what you thought about this shocking moment. And don't forget to smash that like button to help us bring you more incredible content like this. Holm had done the impossible. She had not only defeated Ronda Rousey, she had knocked her out cold in front of the entire world. The crowd sat in stunned silence, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The most dominant champion in women's mixed martial arts history had been dethroned in the most brutal fashion imaginable. As Ronda slowly regained consciousness, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Her perfect record was gone. Her aura of invincibility had been shattered by a woman who had waited patiently for the perfect moment to strike. The psychological impact would be devastating, changing the trajectory of both fighters' careers forever. Holly stood in the center of the octagon, tears streaming down her face as the new bantamweight champion. She had spent years preparing for this moment, studying film, perfecting her technique, waiting for her opportunity. When it came, she seized it with both hands and delivered one of the most shocking knockouts in UFC history. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. Social media exploded with reactions from around the world. Fans who had believed Ronda was unbeatable suddenly questioned everything they thought they knew about mixed martial arts. The woman who had transcended the sport, appearing on talk shows and in movies, had been humbled in the most public way possible. But this was only the beginning of a story that would reshape women's mixed martial arts forever. What happened next would prove that sometimes the most devastating defeats can lead to the most incredible comebacks. The question wasn't whether Ronda would return, but how she would respond to the first real adversity of her professional career. Holly's victory celebration was bittersweet. She had achieved her dream, but she knew that defeating Ronda Rousey came with a target on her back. Every fighter in the division would now be gunning for her, studying her techniques, just as she had studied Ronda's. The pressure of being champion was about to become very real. In the weeks that followed, the fight was analyzed frame by experts around the world. How had Holly managed to do what no other woman had been able to accomplish? The answer lay in her preparation, her patience, and her ability to remain calm under the most intense pressure imaginable. Ronda's team immediately began planning her comeback. They knew that one loss, no matter how devastating, didn't define a career. But the mental scars from that night would prove to be more difficult to heal than any physical injury. The woman who had never tasted defeat was now forced to confront her own mortality in the most public arena possible. The ripple effects of that night in Melbourne continued for years. It changed how fighters prepared for championship fights, how coaches developed game plans, and how fans viewed the concept of invincibility in professional sports. One perfectly timed kick had altered the landscape of an entire sport. Holly's reign as champion would face its own challenges, the pressure of living up to the moment that made her famous, the constant comparisons to her predecessor, and the knowledge that every opponent would bring their absolute best against her. Being the woman who defeated Ronda Rousey was both a blessing and a curse. The medical team's examination of Ronda revealed no serious long-term damage, but the psychological impact was immeasurable. For someone who had built her entire identity around being unbeatable, accepting defeat required a complete reconstruction of her self-image. The journey back would test every ounce of mental strength she possessed. As the arena slowly emptied that night, both women faced uncertain futures. Holly had achieved immortality with a single kick, but now had to prove she belonged at the top. Ronda faced the most difficult challenge of her life, rebuilding from the ground up, after having everything she believed about herself shattered in front of millions of people. The story of that night became legend, replayed countless times and analyzed by future generations of fighters. It served as a reminder that in combat sports, anything can happen in the blink of an eye. No matter how dominant someone appears, there's always someone else preparing to take their place at the top. Years later, both women would reflect on that night as a defining moment in their lives. For Holly, it was the culmination of a lifetime of preparation and the beginning of her legacy. For Ronda, it was the end of one chapter and the beginning of a much more difficult journey toward redemption and self-discovery. The crowd that witnessed history that night would never forget the sound of that kick connecting, the sight of the seemingly invincible champion falling, and the moment when the impossible became reality. It was a reminder that in the world of professional fighting, legends can be made or broken in a single moment of perfect execution. This incredible story shows us that preparation, patience, and believing in yourself can overcome any obstacle. If this breakdown of one of the most shocking moments in UFC history captivated you, then you absolutely need to subscribe to our channel right now and ring that notification bell. We dive deep into the most incredible fight stories that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Comment below with your thoughts on this legendary knockout, and don't forget to absolutely crush that like button to help us continue bringing you these amazing stories that you can't find anywhere else. Your support means everything to us and helps us create the content you love. The immediate aftermath in the locker room was devastating. Ronda sat on the bench, her head in her hands, still trying to process what had just happened. Her mother Anne-Maria de Mars stood silently in the corner, watching her daughter grapple with the first real failure of her professional career. The woman who had been on magazine covers and movie sets just weeks before was now facing the harsh reality that her invincibility was nothing more than an illusion. Her longtime coach, Edmond Tarverdyan, paced nervously around the small room, already making excuses and planning for what he called a temporary setback. But Ronda knew better. This wasn't just a loss, it was a complete dismantling of everything she had built her identity around. The armbar queen had been outclassed in every aspect of the fight. Meanwhile, in the opposite locker room, Holm was surrounded by her team from Jackson Wink MMA. Greg Jackson, her head coach, had tears in his eyes as he watched his fighter hold the championship belt for the first time. They had spent 18 months preparing for this exact scenario, studying every second of Ronda's previous fights, identifying weaknesses that nobody else had been able to exploit. The media obligations that followed were torture for Ronda. Sitting at the post-fight press conference, facing a room full of reporters who had spent years writing about her dominance, she struggled to find words. Her face was swollen, her spirit broken, and her future uncertain. Every question felt like another punch to an already battered ego. "I need to take some time to figure out what's next," she whispered into the microphone, her voice barely audible. The woman who had once commanded attention with her fierce confidence now seemed small and vulnerable under the bright lights of the media room. Holly's press conference was a stark contrast. Confident but respectful, she spoke about the years of preparation that had led to this moment. She credited her boxing background, her team's game plan, and her ability to remain calm under pressure. But even in victory, she was gracious toward her fallen opponent, understanding the magnitude of what had just transpired. The flight back to Los Angeles was the longest of Ronda's life. Staring out the airplane window, she replayed the fight over and over in her mind. Every mistake, every missed opportunity, every moment where she could have done something different. The perfectionist in her was tormented by the realization that she had been thoroughly outclassed. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family, and fans. Some offered support, others criticism, but she couldn't bring herself to read any of them. The woman who had built her brand on social media engagement now wanted nothing more than to disappear from the public eye completely. Back in Albuquerque, Holly was experiencing her own form of overwhelming attention. The quiet, humble fighter who had toiled in relative obscurity for years was now the most famous woman in mixed martial arts. Interview requests poured in from around the world, and suddenly everyone wanted to know the story of the woman who had accomplished the impossible. The psychological impact on Ronda became apparent in the weeks that followed. She withdrew from public appearances, cancelled interviews, and avoided the gym where she had spent countless hours preparing for fights. The depression that set in was deeper than anything she'd experienced, even during the darkest moments of her childhood. Her relationship with Travis Brown, a fellow UFC fighter, became her only source of stability during this period. He understood the unique pressures of professional fighting and the devastating impact that a loss could have on someone's psyche. Together, they began the slow process of rebuilding her confidence and rediscovering her love for the sport. Holly's first title defense was scheduled for 5 months later against Miesha Tate, a fighter who had lost twice to Ronda, but now saw an opportunity to capitalize on the new champion's inexperience. The pressure of being champion was beginning to weigh on Holly, who realized that everyone would now be studying her techniques just as intensely as she had studied Ronda's. The training camps for both women's next fights revealed the lasting impact of their encounter. Ronda worked with sports psychologists, trying to rebuild the mental fortress that had been her greatest weapon. She studied film of the Holly fight obsessively, determined to understand exactly where everything had gone wrong. Holly, meanwhile, faced the challenge of proving that her victory wasn't a fluke. Critics suggested that she had simply caught Ronda on a bad night, that the former champion's personal issues had distracted her from proper preparation. The new champion knew she needed to establish her own legacy beyond being the woman who ended Ronda's reign. The rematch speculation began immediately. Fans and media members called for an immediate second fight, but the UFC had other plans. They wanted to see how both women would respond to their new circumstances before committing to what would undoubtedly be one of the biggest fights in the promotion's history. Ronda's return fight was announced 6 months later against Amanda Nunes, a dangerous Brazilian striker who had been climbing the rankings while the former champion was away. The announcement sent shockwaves through the mixed martial arts community, with many questioning whether Ronda was ready to face another elite striker so soon after her devastating loss. The build-up to Ronda's comeback fight was unlike anything the sport had ever seen. Every interview, every training video, every public appearance was analyzed for signs of whether she had recovered from the psychological trauma of losing to Holly. The pressure was immense, with millions of fans watching to see if their fallen hero could reclaim her throne. Holly's title defense against Miesha Tate took place first, and the result shocked everyone once again. In the 5th round, just when it seemed Holly was cruising to victory, Miesha secured a rear naked choke that forced the champion to tap out. The woman who had seemed destined for a long reign was now the former champion, proving once again that anything could happen in the unpredictable world of mixed martial arts. The loss devastated Holly almost as much as her victory over Ronda had elevated her. She had gone from unknown contender to champion to former champion in the span of just 5 months. The rapid rise and fall served as a harsh reminder of how quickly fortunes could change in professional fighting. Ronda watched Holly's loss from her home in Los Angeles, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and sympathy. Part of her was satisfied that the woman who had ended her reign had also tasted defeat, but another part understood exactly what Holly was going through in that moment of devastating loss. The landscape of women's bantamweight division had been completely transformed by the events that began with Holly's shocking knockout of Ronda. New contenders emerged, established fighters found new motivation, and the entire division became more competitive than ever before. The era of one dominant champion seemed to be over, replaced by a new reality where anyone could beat anyone on any given night. As Ronda prepared for her comeback fight against Amanda Nunes, she carried the weight of an entire sport's expectations on her shoulders. Fans wanted to see the old Ronda, the dominant force who had made the division her personal playground. But the woman stepping into the octagon would be fundamentally different from the one who had been knocked out by Holm. The story that began with one perfectly timed kick had evolved into something much larger than anyone could have predicted. It had changed the careers of multiple fighters, shifted the balance of power in an entire division, and reminded everyone that in the world of professional fighting, legends could be made or broken in the span of a single moment. The reverberations of that night in Melbourne would continue to shape women's mixed martial arts for years to come.